I've been sitting in the Pennsylvania State Archives for 3 hours, going through old coatings reports, and I need to tell you what I found. What I found in a National Bureau of Standards report from 1944 changes everything you think you know about keeping metal alive. The number is $276 billion. Hold that number. I am looking at a beige cover. Type title, BMS 102. Painting steel. The pages are thin. The margins are narrow. Somebody stamped it. Somebody filed it. Somebody expected it to disappear into government shelving and stay there. But the number would not let me move on. $276 billion. That was the direct annual cost of corrosion in the United States when NACE published its national estimate in 2002. Bridges, pipes, farm implements, bolts, tanks, gates, roof panels, hand tools, money leaking out of rusted edges. That number tells you something ugly. Rust was never a solved problem for the public. It was a managed problem for industry. Managed means billable. Managed means repeat coating. Managed means replacement cycles. Managed means you keep buying what failed last time. So I kept turning pages. Federal specifications, historic engineering records, preservation briefs, Pennsylvania agricultural histories, old blacksmith manuals. Then the pattern snapped into focus. The cheap method never vanished. It stayed in the record. It stayed on the farms. It stayed on working iron that could not afford to fail. Here's what the evidence shows, and here's why nobody was supposed to find it. You can give ordinary steel a water-shedding, oxygen-blocking finish with materials cheap enough to fit in one hand. In 1944, the National Bureau of Standards still listed a zinc oxide linseed oil system among its best-performing protective paints for steel. That matters, because it means the old chemistry was not folklore. It was documented performance, and yes, this works even if your house was built 50 years ago, you live in a city, and you've never done this before. Stay with me. Because what I found in Lancaster County uses the same physics the Egyptians used to lock oils and resins into protective films almost 3,000 years ago. Rust is not mysterious. It is oxygen, moisture, and time. The National Park Service states that iron oxidizes rapidly once relative humidity reaches 65%. Cross that line, and bare steel starts losing the fight. Add salt, add acids, add trapped water in a seam. The reaction accelerates. The orange surface you see is only the visible part. Under it, the metal is expanding, loosening, and preparing the next layer to fail. The trick is barrier chemistry. A drying oil like linseed does not remain an oil for long. A 2024 paper in Macromolecules, published by the American Chemical Society, explains that linseed oil cures through three-dimensional free radical polymerization. Oxygen links the molecules together. Heat speeds the process. What began as a liquid becomes a cross-linked solid film. You already understand this process. Your cast iron skillet teaches it every time you season it. Wet oil goes on, heat changes it. A dry shell stays behind. Now move that logic from cookware to steel hardware. Instead of feeding corrosion, the surface starts refusing water. Instead of oxygen touching raw iron directly, it hits a cured skin first. That difference is everything. In practical terms, you get one fully cured barrier layer for every one thin application, versus nearly zero cured barrier from a light petroleum spray that stays soft and migrates away. Call it the real protection coefficient. 1 unit of effort creates a film. The conventional wipe creates residue. One stays put. One evaporates. One protects because it changes state. Mineral pigment makes the system tougher. The 1944 National Bureau of Standards report BMS 102 tested a zinc oxide linseed oil paint with 78% zinc dust, 20% zinc oxide, and a linseed oil vehicle. It rated in Group 1 on galvanized steel. That means cheap mineral, thin oil, and old chemistry were still competing at the top. That gap represents a massive market in coatings, replacement hardware, and repeat service every year. And that is why you have never heard of this. I first felt the difference in East Hempfield Township, west of Lancaster, on a damp afternoon that smelled like wet hay and coal smoke. Outside, the air pressed against your shirt. Inside, the forge room sat warm at roughly 84 degrees. I heard hammer blows, a broom on plank, and one slow hinge moving. That was it. No compressor, no fan motor, no spray can rattle. A man named Eli lifted a hinge strap from a bench and held it under the window. The finish was not glossy. It was not theatrical. It looked like dark skin on old iron. Soft black, brown under light. He rubbed it once with a cloth and said, "Warm iron drinks it. Cold iron sheds it." Then he hung the piece and went back to work. No brand name, no label, no lecture. His family had used that routine for 4 generations. He traced it back through Pennsylvania German people from the Palatinate and Alsace, where flax, oil, and hand-forged hardware belonged to the same household economy. That detail sits inside the wider regional record. Landis Valley Village and Farm Museum preserves Pennsylvania German farming and craft history in Lancaster County. The Pennsylvania Agricultural History Project's Lancaster Plains study documents flax and flaxseed among core 18th century crops. Penn State blacksmithing sources and rural Pennsylvania blacksmith records show how long hand-forged repair culture remained essential. That knowledge never disappeared. It was set aside. It was written out of the manual. It was waiting. Even the paper trail confirms the raw materials were local, ordinary, and old. Lancaster farms grew flax. Smiths forged iron. Families maintained what they owned. A 1995 Penn State blacksmithing study, drawing on early American practice, shows how smiths improved iron by reheating, hammering, and finishing it for long use. No mystery, just maintenance. Now pull the camera back. Long before Pennsylvania, other civilizations found the same answer independently. Around 1000 BC, Egyptians used heated combinations of oils and natural resins as protective varnishes. In AD 75, Pliny recorded that iron could be protected from rust by lead compounds, gypsum, and vegetable pitch. Same principle. Put a film between the metal and the weather. By the 12th century, Theophilus was even more direct. To protect iron, boil it in linseed oil and pitch. Medieval German smiths did not arrive there by fashion. They arrived there by repetition. Heat, oil, seal, preserve. Centuries later, before 1870, Peter Peterson was still boiling iron in linseed oil and coating it with hot beeswax. The formula kept returning because the physics never changed. Every civilization that mastered wet weather, storage, and long-lived iron arrived at the same answer independently. The Egyptians used oils and resins. The Romans used pitch and mineral compounds. Medieval Germans used linseed oil and pitch. The Amish never forgot. They carried it from the Palatinate and Alsace to Pennsylvania about 300 years ago and kept building it because it worked, and because they never needed anyone's permission to do what made sense. The modern erasure starts in 1924. Pierre S. DuPont and General Motors pushed Ducos lacquer across almost the entire GM line. The product they were protecting was factory speed. Traditional oil finishes cured slowly. Slow curing tied up floor space, labor, and inventory. Every extra drying day meant money trapped in steel bodies that could not move to the next station. The alternative threatened millions in throughput. The mechanism was not subtle. The American Coatings Association's own history of automotive coatings says the production bottleneck was the motivation for DuPont's first true automotive coating. Read that again. The bottleneck was the motivation, not repairability, not local maintenance, not the best long-term finish for a farm gate in wet weather. The assembly line became the teacher. The store shelf followed. The man at home stopped being the priority. Then the standards reinforced it. In 1944, the National Bureau of Standards still documented linseed-based protective systems in BMS 102, including zinc dust zinc oxide linseed oil paint number 61. The system was in the federal record. It was not hidden because it failed. It was hidden because faster industrial systems dominated training, procurement, and retail habits after the war. When a chemistry dries faster, ships faster, and gets purchased again sooner, it wins shelf space. That knowledge never disappeared. It was filed away. It was waiting. The named allies all benefited. DuPont benefited by selling the chemistry. General Motors benefited by moving bodies through paint faster and feeding yearly restyling. Trade journals and consumer magazines benefited from the advertising flood that surrounded branded finishes, new colors, and perpetual surface renewal. Federal specifications gave factories a common language for standardized coatings and purchasing. The money moved in one direction, towards systems you bought again. An entire field of knowledge disappeared from maintenance culture, trade memory, and consumer habit. Not because it failed, because it was not profitable. You can watch the same pressure now. Open Secrets shows the American Coatings Association logged $80,000 in federal lobbying in 2023. The association's own U.S. market analysis said coatings volume fell 1.8% from 2022 to 2023, while value still rose 1.4%. Fewer gallons, more money, higher dependence. Better margins. That is the modern continuation. And the motive is perfectly clear. If you can keep a shovel, gate latch, trailer jack, garden tool, or exposed bracket alive with a low-cost wipe-on barrier, that is one less blast job, one less repaint, one less replacement sale, one less recurring service ticket. Nobody told you. Not your builder, not your contractor, not the man who sold you the spray can. The paint and coatings market in America is worth tens of billions a year. Every preserved piece of metal is a small act of refusal. That is why the old record keeps embarrassing the modern sales pitch. The Library of Congress documentation for historic ironwork and bridges preserves examples of raw linseed oil, graphite, and mineral-rich paints used on major American structures long before disposable aerosols filled store shelves. The National Park Service still teaches that painting remains the most common treatment for controlling corrosion on historic iron. Read that carefully. Historic iron, not decorative fantasy, not internet folklore, real structures, real load, real weather. The method survives where failure is expensive. And think about the logic inside a working farm community. A hinge on a barn door does not care about branding. A chain hook does not care about glossy packaging. A hand-forged latch does not care what season the catalog arrives. It cares whether water sits on the surface tonight. It cares whether the owner can renew protection with materials already on the property. The Amish kept the method because their economy punished waste. If a finish worked, they kept it. If it failed, they stopped using it. That is harsher testing than any marketing department will ever accept. This is also why the old finish feels invisible in cities. You were trained to separate craft from maintenance. You were taught that forged hardware belongs to history museums and rust prevention belongs to branded retail chemistry. But look around your own property. Mailbox posts, fence brackets, exterior screws, garden shears, balcony bolts, basement shelving, window well grates, tool heads, trailer couplers, hose bib handles. The same problem appears everywhere, and the same cheap film can interrupt it everywhere. Once you see that, the whole sales story starts to look ridiculous. Now, if you already own a house and you're thinking this only applies to people with land, stay with me. Because this next part is specifically for you. You don't need to buy equipment. You need one thing they already have or can easily get. A bottle, a weekend. Here is the exact blueprint. Start with clean metal. If the rust is flaky, knock it down with a 4-inch wire wheel, 120 grit paper, or a hand brush until only tight oxide remains. If the piece is small, like hinges, latches, or hand tools, work in 2-foot sections on a bench. If it is a railing or gate, do the same thing standing up. Remove grease first. Use muslin cotton soaked with mineral spirits and wipe until the rag stops coming away brown. If the metal has deep orange pits, brush on a phosphoric acid gel and let it sit for 12 to 15 minutes. Wipe it off. Dry the surface completely. Then warm the metal to 120 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit with a heat gun. Not glowing. Not smoking. Just warm enough that a drop of water skitters and disappears in 3 to 5 seconds. On pipe from 1/2 inch to 2 inches in diameter, that heat comes fast. On flat steel, keep the gun 6 to 8 inches away and keep moving. Now make the finish. Melt 2 ounces of beeswax in a clean can set inside hot water. Add 6 ounces of polymerized linseed oil or pure boiled linseed oil. Then cut it with 4 ounces of gum turpentine or odorless mineral spirits. Stir until smooth. A batch that size usually costs $14 to $28, and it covers far more metal than most people expect. Use a lint-free cloth. Wipe on a film so thin you almost think you missed the surface. Wait 8 minutes. Then buff every trace of excess away. That last wipe matters more than the first one. Leaving a thick coat is not optional. A gummy coat causes wrinkling, dirt pickup, and slow curing. After buffing, let the piece rest 24 hours, then repeat once. For outdoor hardware, do a third coat after another 24 hours. For flat steel over 6 square feet, 2 coats are enough if the metal lives under cover. If you want the darker blacksmith look, dust a little powdered graphite into the second coat. If you want extra bite on heavily weathered exterior steel, add a first whisper-thin coat of zinc-rich cold galvanizing compound, then the oil wax finish after it cures. For tools, knives, clevises, and shovel heads, 1 maintenance coat every year keeps the finish alive. For exposed gate hardware, look it over once each spring and again before winter. There is one more detail most people miss. Vertical pieces need less finish than flat ones. A railing post only needs a whisper coat because gravity helps you. A flat shovel back, mower blade, or bench vise jaw needs a more careful buff because extra oil pools at the edge. On new bare steel, the first coat will seem to vanish. On old darkened iron, the second coat usually changes the look more than the first. That is normal. The film is building where the eye cannot see it yet. Use common sense with rags. Drying oils generate heat as they cure. Lay used cloth flat to dry on concrete or soak it in water before disposal. One Saturday morning handles a box of tools. A full porch railing takes 1 weekend. Even a long farm gate usually fits into 2 easy sessions. On a 95-degree day with high humidity, this produces a dry satin shell that sheds hose water instead of turning orange by evening. Run the numbers. Your conventional rust removal cycle costs $180 to $420 to strip and repaint a small gate, $12 to $26 a month in sprays and touch-up, and lasts 3 to 7 years before it fails again. A contractor-applied coating job on a railing can run $600 to $1,800 fast. This finish costs $22 to $46 total for a useful batch. It lasts for years with light maintenance. Your choice. Everything I've covered across this channel, root cellar airflow, lime wash walls, hand pump water, I've put it all in one place. Step by step, season by season, room by room, in the order the families actually use it. Link is in the description. But stay here, because what Eli built into that finish is the part nobody is talking about yet. The part nobody sees is identity. Once you understand that the old systems were cheap, local, and durable, you stop acting like a permanent customer and start acting like a caretaker. The Amish did not read this in a textbook. They figured it out the way all real knowledge gets discovered, by paying attention to what the material was already doing. Heat opens the surface, oil cures, wax slows water, metal survives. The first time you do this, it will feel too simple. Good. Simple is what survives. Simple is what you can repeat in October, in March, after rain, before storage, and without waiting on a shipment. Complex systems create customers. Simple systems create owners. That is the real divide in this story. One side wants you dependent on products, schedules, and replacements. The other side wants you competent with heat, cloth, oil, and 10 quiet minutes at your own bench, with your own 2 hands. If you're the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do. Hit subscribe. Not for me, for what comes next, because this is not a channel. This is a quiet movement of people who have decided they're done being sold what they already own. I want to hear from you. Drop your state, the wettest piece of metal on your property, and what you spend replacing it in the comments. I read every single one, and your answers decide what we cover next. Next week, I'm going to show you what a 1946 Penn State document reveals about keeping a cellar cold with nothing but earth, lime, and airflow. The technique uses nothing but soil mass, vent timing, and shade. and the report from that era that proves building experts knew the temperature numbers decades before selling you compressors for the same job, you're not going to want to miss that one.